Good to go then.
Okay. So, seeing a presence of a quorum, calling to order this meeting of the Amherst School Committee at 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday, June 28th. And we'll start with roll call attendance. Um, Peter,
Sorry, Peter here.
Jennifer,
Jennifer present.
Irv,
Irv present.
Ben,
Ben present.
and Allison present. And we also have Nick Morris, our recorder, Maylene Scott, and Doug Slaughter here. Our first item is approval of the minutes from May 31st, as well as the joint portion of the meeting on June 9th. So we can look at them separate if there's any edits. Otherwise, we can consider a motion for both simultaneously. Are there any edits? No? Seeing none, I move to approve the minutes from May 31st, 2022 and June 9th, 2022. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Irv, and we'll take a roll call vote. Ben?
Ben, aye.
Allison, aye. Irv?
Irv, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, I.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next up is public comment, and we did not receive any public comments. I will, if we do have members of the public that join us before we move, before 7, I will ask that we open up the floor briefly if anybody does show up by then. But did I say 7? I meant, sorry, we're in a time machine. If anybody, if we do have members of the public to join us by 8:45 to speak, I will circle back and invite them to comment. So with that, we'll move on to superintendent's update.
Thank you. I'll be very quick tonight, given the time. Hopefully get some time back. Just 4 things. The elementary graduations were lovely. They were all on the 15th, and we had our central office they were all simultaneous, so I couldn't be at all of them, but I chose to go to Fort Rivers. Marta Guevara, Dr. Guevara was at Crocker Farms, and Doreen Cunningham, our assistant superintendent, was at Wildwood along with Dr. Brady. So Dr. Slaughter did go to Pelham, so he was part of that circle of going, but that's a different committee, so we'll leave it there. But they were all lovely and really nice events, and the weather held out. It was pretty perfect out. So I really enjoyed the one I went to at Fort River, and kudos to the leaders there. We are hard at work getting summer school ready, which opens a week from tomorrow. At the elementary school, we have a lot of summer programs. We have the Achievement Academy, we have an ELL program, we have our special ed program. We also have the Comandantes program that is funded by the grant that we received, although that one, based on space, is actually being located for the second year in a row at the high school. So our young students get a very neat experience of being over at the high school in some science labs this year, and they made it work last year. We have a larger program this year. I think what's particularly unique this year is we've been able to include incoming kindergarten students in the Comandantes summer program this year, which is something we always thought was a good idea, and we were able to pull it off. So kudos again to Katie Richardson for her work getting that organized. For a little while, we've been looking at having some external partners assist us, perhaps in community relations, particularly as it shares with the wonderful things happening in our school, understanding choices families made. This goes all the way back for those who've been on the committee a while. We did a lot of community outreach, understanding charter school choice students as private school students a while back, and we've been very fortunate. I want to thank Peter for making a nice connection for us, but to be working with UMass Eisenberg students, their graduate students, as a project that they're working on. So they're in the process of looking a huge document review that we sent them lots of things, but they're also meeting with, I think it's 16 different individuals within our schools to understand what they value about our schools, and they're going to put together a proposal of things and activities that might be in the district's best interest around sharing some of its excellent teachers, our community, the building project, all sorts of things that are going on in our schools, to be able to be actively communicating out that information for families who are consumers in some ways, and they're making choices about where their children go to school. So I want to publicly thank UMass and the Eisenberg students for partnering with us. It's a family in one of our districts who runs the program, who was able to kind of marshal some resources for us, and they've been wonderful and engaged and asking great questions. So more on that in the fall, but just kind of a neat project. And finally, going from kind of big idea to literally on the ground important, is some paving work happened this week. Last week at Fort River and Wildwood. There were some pretty sizable potholes where we had some concerns about safety, and we were able to get it in under the June 30th wire in terms of budgetary commitments, and a lot of concerns, particularly at Fort River, about there was one pothole that was quite sizable, and people worried about tires, hubcaps, car. So there's always more to grow. If you go back to the old capital plan for Fort River, you see that replacing the whole parking area was on there. Clearly the building project, and the price point of doing that, that's not in the cards in the next 4 years, but we want to make it a livable, drivable, habitable place, and this is one step in that direction. So I want to thank our facilities department for some quick work, and Doug for your quick work, and we'll talk about that more with budget transfers. And that is my abbreviated update given the time. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mike on the update? Thank you for that update. Next up is Chair's update. I do not have an update, so we can skip through that. Are there any school committee updates or announcements?
I left out one. Oh my goodness, in my haste. So I apologize. Is it okay to go back
Yes.
one step? So Margot, I'm sorry if you were able to put your screen back on. So we're joined tonight, and I'm not sure, given the timing, how late she'll stay with us, but Margot is our Amherst College intern for the summer. You might remember Obed and Masahiro the last 2 years. This is the third year, and we've kind of nicely with Amherst College, we've kind of firmed up sort of some long-term commitments and descriptions of roles and responsibilities. Margot started last week and jumped right into the staff working group looking at 6th grade and the programming for the middle school, which everyone in the community will hear about probably in about a month or so with what they came up with, some fine tuning. She's working on that project right now. She's going to be working on looking at the start time survey and analyzing that and bringing that back to her internship probably end by the next time you meet, but her work will continue and some other projects in some of our summer programs. So we're thrilled to have her, graduate of the New Haven Public Schools, and very interested in education. And so she definitely has hit the ground running. She wasn't really given another option. The first morning she was straight away to the group of 17 talented educators working on that. But she had some large shoes to fill with our folks in the last 2 years, but she's jumped right in and doing a fabulous job. So I just wanted to thank Margot for being with us this summer and for your work, and thank Amherst College for continuing to supply us with such outstanding interns working with us, and Debbie Westmoreland in particular, and myself in central office. So thank you, Margot, and welcome.
Welcome. Thanks. So I didn't see any, but I'll ask again, were there any school committee announcements or updates? No? Okay. And I don't see that anybody from the public has joined us for public comment, so we will move on. So first up is superintendent evaluation. The report, summative report, is attached to the agenda item. And it should look very familiar to those since we were just at another committee meeting. And this template was actually created several years ago, and that's why they do look so similar. But as much of a preamble, because we literally just came off of another meeting talking about the process, but just high level overview. In the fall, we set a set of goals, which are included in this memo. that then leads at that time. We connect the goals to the standards and indicators in the DESE superintendent evaluation rubric. And at the end of the year, Mike presents us with you update us throughout the year on your progress on the goals. And at the end of the year, present us with a report, the artifacts report. I did link to that in this memo, so that does sort of live on so for anybody going back to anybody from the public or any school committee member wanting to go back, they can connect right back into the artifact document. So present the artifacts, and then the school committee, each individual individually evaluates the superintendent. The superintendent has access to each of those individual comments and reports, but the school committee reviews and approves an overall summary report of the individual evaluations. So I'm not going to read it. Would folks want me to share it on screen? No? Okay. For anybody watching the recording of this or watching live on TV, it is attached in the board docs to the agenda item. But overall, the evaluations from committee members demonstrated strong support for the superintendent, and we rated him either, give him an overall performance rating of either proficient or exemplary. Proficient being fully satisfactory and sort of rigorous expected level of performance, or exemplary, which is significantly exceeds proficient and could serve as a model of practice regionally or statewide. And we rated his impact on student learning as either high or moderate. Those, you can see sort of the breakout at the bottom of the first page and the top of the second page. There were a lot of comments throughout, and so the next section sort of pulls from the individual comments as well as sort of the overall summary comments from the group. But one of the things that was mentioned by multiple members was the collaborative approach that Mike uses in projects. And multiple members sort of also commented sort of seeking broad stakeholder input on major initiatives such as the Ed Plan for the School Building Project, and using multiple methods for that. I think there were several comments also about opportunities for improvement or continuous improvement, if you will, on communication and outreach. One member noted, we could be finding new ways to engage stakeholders, or to be more proactive in communication, or being more clear and sort of continuing to work with how we communicate about budget issues in particular. We also sort of cited just continued skillful leadership and management of the district and commitment to all students. One member cited as could serve as a model of practice, and cited sort of the thoughtful and competent planning and leadership coming out of the pandemic. Several members also mentioned that in our comments here. If you go through, so those first two sort of grids are the overall performance rating and the impact on student learning. And then on subsequent pages, beginning, I think it's on page 4, is the overall rating on the goals. And for each of the 5 goals that we had approved for Mike, for the most part, the balance was unmet or significant progress to exceeded, with the exception of one on budget planning. But for the most part, the center of gravity was around that sort of significant progress and met on the goals. On the individual ratings on standards, again, the center of gravity is about proficient, proficient to exemplary, or solid proficient on each of the standards. And at the back end of the comment, you will see just literally copy and paste verbatim of the summary comments from each individual evaluator that had written summary comments. So with that, I'm going to go around the table in case folks want to add any individual summary comments for Mike on this evaluation. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order, and I'm going to start with, I'm going to go alphabetical order by first name. So Ben. Actually, that would be me, but I'm going to go last. So,
I was getting ready to challenge you on that.
I know. I was like, man.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of like tack on to what I had said at the other meeting I was at earlier when I had a clearer mind and more rest. But in all seriousness, I do think we could be more creative with outreach and these sorts of things. But also, I think we have the right person to actually hear that feedback and do something about it. And I think that was evidenced during I talked about it earlier, the COVID community forums where we were actually out in public and that sort of thing. And and I'm just thankful to have somebody that we can actually like disagree with in a non, I don't know, confrontational manner, and that receives feedback and actually does something with that feedback. I feel confident in our leadership currently. And it's
Sure.
You know, I guess I've already said this, but to me, the hallmark of any leader is how they deal with crises. And in the last 2 years have been a crisis situation in relationship to COVID. And when I looked at all of the evaluation of this, everything I kept in mind was how the schools came through this. And by the schools, I mean our community. And it was through Mike's leadership that we came through this intact, and in some ways thriving. So, and the other thing is, it's very difficult to, when I went through all the evaluation procedures and the questions, etc., to give a good evaluation on some of those items, because some of those items require a lot of in-depth knowledge and interaction with the superintendent. And that was not something that I could look at in a fair manner. I could only look at the results of what I was seeing in terms of the school system functioning as a whole. And the school system, the Amherst schools, were functioning very well. And so I could only look at that in terms of, well, Mike has done a proficient job in terms of keeping us as a school system together during really challenging times.
Thank you. Jennifer.
So I took this task very literally in terms of evaluating Mike's progress towards the goals that were laid out last year. And I wasn't involved in creating the goals, and I've only been around for half a year. So I looked at Mike's artifact document and tried to my best to gauge that against the specific goals that were laid out as they relate to the standards from DESE. And I found that, almost all of the goals seem to be met, if not significantly met. I do think we could do a better job of communicating and engaging with the public, specifically on budget issues. And I think that is an evolving dynamic that both the school committee and the district and the superintendent can improve on. I have two just comments on process. One is that, and this is something we can think about for next year. Like, if we are going to evaluate the superintendent on things on more than just the stated goals, that should be in the survey. I mean, I guess there was an overall performance in the survey, but I still interpreted that as progress towards the goals, not as a more general or having to do with anything outside the goal. So something to think about, and I will think about that if I'm on the evaluation subcommittee for next year. The survey should reflect what we actually want to evaluate the superintendent on. My other question is maybe a question for Mike or the central office. The survey from administrators is super helpful. And I was glad to see the results of that. It looks like the first question in that survey is, which district are you associated with? And it even says in the question, this is so that your answers can be delivered to the correct school committee. But then the results are just all lumped together. So I don't know, in the future, if we could separate out those results, and then each school committee can get just their specific results, that would be even more helpful. Thank you.
Peter.
Yeah, okay. So I appreciate the work on the summative eval. I'm happy to vote in support of that tonight. I know that's a lot of work to put together. And I know it's late and some of this will sound repetitive, but you know, this is one of the more important responsibilities we have as a school committee. So I think it's worth the time. So I'll just echo a couple of sentiments that Jennifer laid out. You know, I do think that how members approach the superintendent evaluation process is always something that we could be continuously improving on. It's not black and white, you know, how you delineate evaluation of goals in context, where the relationships lie in terms of responsibility on goals that might be shared between the superintendent and school committee, and then how you apply other more general evaluative qualitative assessments in an overall rating. There's a lot of excellent doc and video and guidance on that from DESE. It's something that we could certainly do a deeper dive into in the future. But generally speaking, you know, just to kind of pivot towards, you know, how I feel about Mike in this process, I feel like we have an exceptional leader of our public schools, and I feel like it's important for us to let the community know that, given particularly how difficult it is to find a good superintendent, and how disruptive it is to districts when the relationship between superintendents and school committees or communities break down, as we've seen regionally. And we're really fortunate to have somebody who has such excellent quantitative professional skills and people skills, who's such a great match for our district. And I really feel like across the spectrum of what we think of in terms of superintendent, the areas of superintendent skills, whether it's leadership, you know, vision of new initiatives, public communication, understanding of teaching with his background as a teacher and a principal and assistant superintendent, the budget aspect, supporting staff. You know, I think you're fortunate in at least in our state. I mean, I'm only familiar with you know, districts and committee members in our state who I've spoken to over the years. You're fortunate if you have a superintendent who's, you know, reasonably competent in all of those and very good in some of those. And I feel like Mike has demonstrated over his 6 years as superintendent that he is excellent in all of those areas and really exceptional in some of those. And some other members have touched upon that. Primarily in terms of his collaborative approach to change and change management, that even when he has like a sharp or clear vision of something, he doesn't just barrel ahead and force it to happen. He really slows down and in a meaningful way takes people into the process, so that the end result isn't one person's vision, isn't one committee's vision, it wasn't a group's vision. It's a shared expression, and that's really empowering. I think I've found it empowering in terms of the collaborative relationship with the school committee, and certainly from the responses from the staff, from the staff survey that was just mentioned, the anonymous 360 survey of our 21 district leaders, principals, assistant principals, directors, etc. Was a very high quality response there. That was actually one of the more striking specific details in the artifacts document for me, was that on every aspect of a dozen different performance areas, outstanding or above and beyond normal expectations, the highest rating was the most common rating, and every single respondent gave commendable or outstanding to the areas of being accessible when they need support and guidance, and offering effective problem solving to support. And it's something that we don't get a lot of visibility into on school committee, right? It's part of the iceberg that we're not able to see, but it's such a vital aspect of quality leadership at the superintendent level. And I guess the last thing I would say is, you know, even with all those articulated skills, to have an educational leader who is so kind-hearted and open-minded in the way he approaches things, to be so centered on the well-being of children, right? To have that kind of heart-centered grounding in everything he does. Is just makes a world of difference. And I've seen it time and again. I won't go over the many different examples of initiatives this year that I've seen that, but it just comes across in everything he does. And it makes that spirit of collaboration so much more natural, I think, and so much more easy to facilitate in different areas, because there's a humility, right? There's, what's the shared goal? It's the well-being of children. And so He's very comfortable taking criticism. He's very comfortable embracing that spirit of continuous improvement. And we're fortunate in a district that is as engaged and as complex as ours with the 3 districts, that we have such a quality superintendent. So I have a lot of respect and appreciation for the work he's put in this year, as well as past years. And I thank him for another great year of service to our students and our community.
And so I will also add to, I actually won't say as much as I said in another committee because I just said it and it's late, but I will echo much of what my colleagues have said already tonight in this particular meeting. And I want to call out, I think, because this was different in this committee, talking about, Peter just referenced the process and your collaborative approach. And I think what really stood out also for me was in the 6th grade, the decision about moving the 6th grade to the middle school. I think, we were all sort of moving forward from the space perspective and sort of felt like the train was leaving the station in terms of moving as quickly as possible. And I think, what really stood out for me in that particular one is as you continued to gather input and feedback and work with others, you pivoted to recommending that we actually slow down and use the time. And again, as multiple people have referenced, to keep the focus on the students and to really get it right for the students that are going to be the first ones that actually move. And I think that really stood out to me in terms of manifestation and visible evidence of here's where you make decisions, good decisions, always with the well-being of our students at the forefront, and sort of really thinking about that, even despite the pressure, all the facility pressures and everything else to make that move happen sooner. So I will echo, I think, as I mentioned, sort of that approach, I think really stands out for me across the board with and sort of your willingness to move as you work with others and get additional data. And I think, to echo the other comment was we've made great strides, I think, in communication, engagement, outreach, and particularly around the budget, which is sort of a forgotten area, and we've made movement, and we can continue to do more. And so, as a joint responsibility with the school committee, to really help our community and our public and our municipal officials understand the budget issues and constraints that we're facing. And I look forward to continuing to work with you next year. So if there's no more discussion, I will move that we approve the summary report as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
I think that was Irv. Moved by Allison, seconded by Irv. And we'll take a roll call vote. Ben?
And I.
Irv?
Aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, I.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
And Allison, aye. Motion passes unanimously. And again, thank you very much, Mike. And Mike?
Yep, and I'll also follow suit in being briefer than I was a little bit earlier, but I do really appreciate the feedback, both, again, the warm and cool feedback. I agree about the engagement pieces as it relates to the budget, that we have room to grow, and look forward to growing with you in that. And, I was talking to a colleague of mine recently who is changing districts, and I feel incredibly supported, both that I feel like my work is appreciated and honored by this group, but also that my work is challenged and people ask questions and make suggestions frequently. And that's not always visible to the public, because sometimes that's individual school committee members contact me. I have a question about this, where are you on that? But those less visible conversations are equally appreciated, and they help me be better at my job. And I really do appreciate the working relationship that we have together. So thank you all, and looking forward to next year. Thanks.
Speaking of next year, our next item is goals guidance. And this is, why is this on in June when we're not even completely done? But I think one of the things that, if you notice, the date that we voted on and approved the goals for last year, it was November, which is, over a third of the year is gone by that point. And that was when we, finalized the goals. We did start talking about them earlier, but we didn't finalize them until November. So this is an opportunity to at least start the conversation sooner, so that when we come back at the end of the summer, we can sort of hit the ground running, and we've already had some baseline conversations about what we'd like to see in the goals. The other thing too is, ideally, goals for the next year should be built off of the learnings from the evaluation and performance of the previous year. So, while our evaluations of this year are fresh in our minds, it's helpful to have that conversation about, well, how does that influence, or what does that impact in terms of what we'd like to see for goals for the superintendent for the upcoming year. The draft that's attached in the agenda is for those that have been on the school committee in past years, should look very familiar. It's the same format that we've used the last couple of years to sort of have a conversation. And just in terms of process, what we've done the last couple of years is had a conversation with a document like this about sort of our guidance to Mike, and to enable him and support him in building drafting goals. And it sort of outlines our principles, some basic principles, and it just reminds ourselves what were the goals of the prior year. In putting together this draft, what I did is, having read everybody's comments and putting together that summative report that we just approved, sort of pulled out some themes that I was seeing in everybody's comments and evaluation, and tried to capture them here. This is by no means, eloquent, because it is a draft, but it really is intended to frame the conversation so that Mike can hear all of our perspectives on some of the things, and sort of be in a good position come August, September to draft some goals for us to talk about. So some of the things that we talked about, just to walk folks through it, is if you get to the second page, where it says priorities for the 22-23 school year, the guiding principles that we've had, and I pulled one out from this that we've had the last couple of years, which is recognizing COVID. Not that COVID's going away, but I think, just that what we had said in the past was that we wanted to balance our expectations with the understanding that COVID was still very significant attention. It will continue to be, but I didn't feel like we wanted to enshrine that as a guiding principle. Happy to add that back in. One of the things that we've talked about was wanting to align goals across the 3 districts where we're feasible to make that total effort manageable and achievable. I highlighted the bit about the timeline of a single school year. Some districts in the state, and actually it's allowable by state law that superintendents after so many years of service can move to having multi-year goals. So we can move to doing an every other year summative evaluation with a progress check in the intervening year. I don't want us to sort of come to a decision on that, but I think we should be pondering that, and so that we can come back to that when we actually are forming goals in the fall. Just given the sort of size of many of the projects that we have, that might be something that we want to consider. But also that not all top priorities and projects need to be defined as superintendent goals every year, right? So every year there's a lot of priorities, a lot of things that are going on, and yet we don't want to end up in a situation that we have 10 goals or 5 goals that are so broad and big that it becomes difficult again to manage them. So going back to bullet number 1. The rest of this, the next section is sort of initiatives and projects, and these might be the ones that sort of directly lead into goals. And then the next section is sort of priority values and themes that should be sort of undercurrents and underlying the goals, but not necessarily called out as specific goals or distinctive goals. So the starting point on here is that there's a couple goals that are going to continue to be that are very similar to what we had this year. So the 6th grade move. So that will be actually working on the model and moving into implementation going into the next school year. The elementary school building project continues. So this is sort of, talking about that, continue supporting that work. Budget planning and communication. So been reading all of our evaluations. That's a theme that I think that was still prominent that we want to continue working on and partnering with Mike on that and his team on that. I skipped curriculum and learning. So we had in the previous year identifying new math curriculum. Here it would be implementing the new math curriculum. And one of the things that I'd suggest is sort of develop that outcomes reporting framework. So how are we going to measure success and sort of impact of the new math curriculum, particularly in light of, again, going back to pre-pandemic, some of the conversations that the school committee at that time was having was how do we address the education deficits that, or some call it gaps, we refer to them as deficits in our district, particularly with math. So some big topic in there about sort of as we implement the math curriculum, how are we going to measure ourselves and sort of track that we're actually making progress on that for all students. And then last but not least, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So continue to focus on the works and continue to the work that's been happening sort of in the next phase. I'm not going to read all of the others, but those are sort of outlining some of the priority values and themes. I didn't feel like they would change dramatically from what we've had in the past years. So, thoughts, reactions? Jennifer.
Thank you for putting together this document, Allison. It's a great place to start. So, as you know, this is my first year doing this. So, does Mike propose the goals and then we approve them, or do we write the goals? Like, how does the process work?
Great question. Mike drafts the goals and proposes them. And in years before we crafted this particular document, it was the school committee would have a general conversation like this about what we wanted to see in the goals. And Mike would sort of use that to build on and build the goals. So this document, a couple of years ago, we created this to sort of formalize it because we didn't want it to be sort of like a catch-all potpourri of ideas and wanted to sort of be a little bit more deliberate about giving direction to Mike for drafting those goals. Peter.
So yeah, so I'm happy we're having this conversation now so that we can all take this back as like something to ruminate over over the summer. I think in the last few years, if memory serves, we've started this a little bit earlier each time, and I think we've benefited from that. So at this point, I have more questions than in my mind than answers. But I think this is a great prompt. I'm intrigued by the idea of multi-year goals, particularly because when I look at least the first 4 and the goals from this year, and that first goal was really 2 goals in one. They're all really multi-year goals, and so it's sometimes difficult, I think, to break those down into composable parts that are going to be which exact milestones you're going to hit in which particular year. So perhaps having the flexibility on some or more of these goals to do multi-year goals might be advantageous. There is, in terms of the number of goals, there, just a brief reminder that as part of the contract, because of the 3 districts together can propose no more than 8 goals total. So there is a bit of collaboration. I think that's one of the main reasons why some of these more general goals, like are goals about general topics, like DEI and budget communication were shared across. But yeah, but when I think about, like, if I had 20 seconds and I was forced to like draft what should the superintendent's goals be, I think the first four are pretty great candidates for next year because they're continuing. And this does of course get back to what we talked about before, and was one of the impetuses for the crafting the document in this way, which is there are some things that you want the superintendent to prioritize and focus on every year, right? And so there is a bit of an anxiety of like, well, if we don't put budget communication, for example, as a specific goal, then he won't focus on budget communication, which we know is not true. And yet it's about focusing. What do we want to pick for evaluative to be the primary evaluative focus that's driving some of the years, even though obviously he does a lot more than that. So yeah, so I like this a lot. I don't have much more to add from that. I actually, I would be interested to see what Mike would come up with on his own prior to us like sort of giving more direction. Like if we all came back, for example, the next time we talked about this, right? Like what would he come up with? I don't know if we'd want to just wait until the end of our own internal dialogue, but.
On your question about multi-year goals, I think it's that the full evaluation would be done every other year. So you wouldn't be able to sort of pick and choose and say these goals are 2-year goals and this one's not. It would be all in 1 year or all in 2 years. Jennifer.
Allison, you said there were some guidelines from DESE about once the superintendent's been there a number of years. What do you know off the top of your head? What is the number of years that is that like once they've been there for X years, then you can move to multi-year evaluations?
It is that. I don't remember the number of years. It's Mike's service in the district is well beyond that.
Okay.
But I will, after this, unless Mike's already dug it up, but there was an MASC workshop on evaluations that they did specifically talk about that, doing the 2-year ones. And so that if Mike doesn't have it, I can share that out with the committee so that we can chew on that over the summer. Mike? Yeah,
my recollection is it's much like the teacher's piece around professional teacher status. So that would be the 4th year. I'm not 100% sure, but that's my recollection. Jennifer.
I have 2 pieces of input about the goals, maybe 2 pieces of input for Mike. One is that, like, I'm a fan of SMART goals. I particularly like the M part of SMART metrics, and I would love to see some metrics associated with some of the goals, or maybe some sub-bullet points within the goals. Like one example is, one of them is about retaining and hiring faculty of color. Like maybe there could be some goal numbers associated with those, some achievable ones, right? Because the part of the A in SMART is achievable, so that it's clear whether or not the goal was achieved. I always think, like, how do I know if this goal was achieved? And I know we've talked about tonight the fact that this is not black and white, and we can take into consideration context, et cetera, but I would love to see some metrics associated with some of these goals. My other suggestion is that if we as a school committee are going to put a lot of value and importance in the administrator survey, which it sounds like many of us do, maybe that should be one of the goals, or maybe there should be like one of the key metrics in that survey should be one of the goals, or should be mentioned in one of the goals. Maybe it's increasing or maintaining one of the key metrics in that survey, because it seems like that's something that we place a lot of value in.
See Peter's hand, but I'm just going to look and see if Irv or Ben wanted to add anything. It's okay if not. It's late, I know. Okay, Peter.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing to ruminate on, the role of metrics. That would be cool to bring in some historical, data on what that 360 anonymous eval has been of district leadership, and what would make sense as benchmarks. I'm always kind of like of 2 minds on metrics and goals. Like, you don't want to make a goal so vague that it can just be met based on personal judgment alone. And yet the other tension point in my mind is you don't want to make it so quantitative that, you know, it's technically met, but it's the spirit of it wasn't really met, or the opposite, right? And so I kind of get back to this principle of not everything that counts can be counted, not everything that can be counted counts, you know. And so there is certainly a value to trying to quantify some things, but I think it's real discretionary in terms of what it can be applicable to. So I'm definitely open to it. I don't think every single goal can be applied like that, but it's certainly a question that I think is worthy to be asked, and see if it can be applied to the various initiatives.
Jennifer, is your hand up again? Oh, okay. Great. So there was I think, Peter, you had asked the question about whether we wanted to see sort of a framework or a draft from Mike when we come back to talking about the guidance, or do we want to talk about the guidance one more time when we reconvene in August, and then get a draft from, is that what, a draft of goals from Mike? Is that what you were suggesting, Peter?
I wasn't like advocating for it. I was just kind of tossing around in the spirit of having more questions than answers at this point. Whether we wanted to, you know, wait until we felt like we had more definitive guidance before we asked Mike to draft something, whether it would be a worthy exercise to see what Mike might come up with on. He might, I don't know, mention some topics that we haven't even touched upon in this discussion. So, and that might be illuminating for us. I don't know. Although the more I talk through it now, you know, with one of the first forks in the road that we probably ought to decide sooner in the process rather than later is whether we do want to do this multi-year approach, because that would change the nature of the goals, obviously, that we're talking about. Certainly in the definition, right, in terms of like what constitutes success. I don't know if there's like additional, maybe some information or references that we might be able to put together this summer, even just links to DESE stuff where we can think about it.
Yeah, and I also think that if we were to move to an every other year summative evaluation, we'd want to have some conversation about how that might be paced, right? Again, like not sort of it's all going to happen at the end of the year too, right? You know, like something to sort of understand, so that when we do the mid cycle sort of quick conversation, that we understand sort of what our expectations would have been. Mike, did you raise your hand?
Just very briefly, what I find beneficial is if, you know, whether it's Allison and a partner, just refine the document based on the feedback of the committee members. I just also want to note that some committee members may process this and next week say, oh, I think about this. If I get that document, what's helpful process-wise to me is take that, consider it, come up with goals that often correlate with this document, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, we have really good conversations, in my experience, as to why that is. So I think process-wise, I think the cleaner the document, and I don't mean it's not clean, that's not a critique, Allison. Getting this in June it's a first. So I'm very, very pleased. But I think based on the feedback that was really helpful and feedback that you may receive, if we come back or over the summer, get a cleaner copy, then I think, work on a draft of goals that again align with this. And if they don't align 100%, then that's a good cause for more conversation. I see that as a positive, not negative.
Yeah, I think I would feel more comfortable, because I think like it just as you described it, I think as we sort of move forward, you know, there might be something that we're not thinking of right now that you're not thinking of. And I think, you know, maybe, you know, our first meeting back would be good to sort of regroup on this document, clean it up. And then at the next meeting is when sort of you have a draft of goals for discussion. Any further thoughts before we move on? Okay. Next up is budget transfers. So this should look, I guess this looks very familiar to another committee that we were just on. So Doug and Mike.
I think I'll spare you my spiel it's no different at Amherst than it was at Region, given the hour. Doug, I would like you to display because the numbers may be different, but the reason we're having this conversation is identical. So I think I'll hand it straight to Doug, if that's okay with the committee, and not repeat myself. So Doug.
Thank you, Mike. Hopefully this is zoomed into a sufficient level to allow everybody to read it. But the short story is that our budget is finishing the year in pretty good shape. I mean, there's still quite a bit to do, even though there's only a couple of days left in the fiscal year. There's quite a bit to resolve as we finish up the year and button up the last things. But nonetheless, we have a sense of where we have some areas of need and some additional support needed to meet the obligations that we have. And fortunately, we're in a circumstance where we have resources available to meet those needs. And so we're asking to do some transfers to support some areas of the budget, which are in the bottom of this chart with increasing their budget amounts. And we have areas that are in the upper part of the grid there that are showing us where we have some resources available and able to support those areas and help us balance out our budget as we try to finish up the year. I think the long story short, our budget in pretty good shape. There's things that aren't surprising with regard to what we're seeing in some of our areas of need. I will just tell you a couple of quick things. Contracted payroll is additional work that people do for us under contract. So most of that is incurred in summer school. And the thing is that summer school starts in July, which is in the beginning of a fiscal year. So a lot of that expense was incurred last summer. And we did a lot more programming with kids as we got back into a circumstance where we could be in person and do more summer programming. So that's part of why that need is there. We've mentioned all throughout the year the increased needs in special education, which is why we have a fairly large need for some support in that area. The others are sort of smaller and more minor adjustments that are necessary based on costs of facilities, and actions we've taken. Superintendent mentioned the paving at the schools. That's an option that is under facilities. Transportation, we've had some increases in some of our needs there relative to the changes to schedule and that sort of thing. So that explains sort of broadly the rationale behind why we have those requests in front of you, and I'm happy to answer any questions people have regarding any of the specifics.
Questions? Seeing none, I'm going to, sorry. I move to modify the FY22 operating budget by making budget transfers between centers as shown in the Finance Director's memo dated June 27th, 2022.
Second.
Moved by Allison, second by Jennifer. Is there any further discussion? No, we'll take a roll call vote. Irv?
Aye.
Ben?
Aye.
Allison, aye. Jennifer?
Aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
The motion passes unanimously. So moving right along to the next item. So now going back to the next year's budget. For those that weren't aware, the town council, when it met, Mike?
I know this sounds like an odd request, but I think the budget conversation might do well if I give the brief kindergarten update before it. And I meant to say that being this part of the meeting, and I, much like introducing Margot to the group, struck out. So over to you. But if I could do that, because that actually leads into the FY23 part better.
Perfect. Yep. So we'll flip-flop items E and D. So we'll go with kindergarten update.
All right, I'm going to just share my screen. There it is. And so this is when we get, let's see if I can make it larger, but still visible. When we get back in the fall, we'll talk more generally about the Comandante's enrollment policy, but there was a request to understand our kindergarten enrollment. So let me just talk through this. The highlighting shouldn't be there, so I apologize for that. It means nothing. But the number of sections adds up to be 7. You know, oftentimes we've been between 7 and 8 sections. Right now, it looks like both Wildwood and Crocker Farm will have only 2 sections of kindergarten, and Fort River have 3, 2 Commandante sections, and 1 what we call purple section. We're using positive language instead of non-Commandantes or English only, because that's not actually an accurate description. So we're calling it you know, here we say English, Spanish, but I'll get to that in a second. So for fiscally, that's good news. You know, that we do have contingency in the back of the budget. We were keeping our fingers crossed financially that we would have 7 sections of kindergarten. We've gone back and forth between 7 and 8. I think the other piece of good news is that we were able to accept more school choice students than we originally perceived that we would be able to accept. So what you see is at Crocker Farm, 2 sections right now, 28 residential students, and we've accepted 3 school choice students to make 31. We know we'll have more students come register in the summer. If we don't, we are not at the bottom of our wait list for school choice. We let families know we'll come back to them in early August. At Fort River, you could see that we have 3 sections, 38 resident students, 10 school choice students. For Commandantes, we are at 19 for English. We were at 20, and 1 student opted to go to a different district, so we're now down to 19. So we're essentially full, but we will fill that shortly. That all is in the last couple days, and we're up to 16 Commandante students who have Spanish language background. That is a higher number than we've had in the past, which is exciting news. Really good news, and that includes 3 school choice students. 3 of the 10 school choice students at Fort River had Spanish language background, were accepted, and wanted to be in the Commandantes program. At Wildwood, we're sitting at 35 students. We're still looking at that as 2 sections. Because it's close to 2, we're not accepting any school choice students in kindergarten at Wildwood. So fiscally, this is good news. 7 sections, 13 school choice students with the potential to add a couple more in early August it keeps our enrollment at the level we need it. We were anticipating 8 to 10 school choice, not necessarily 13, or perhaps even moving that to 15, depending on how enrollment goes this summer. And so the short story is higher number, or the headline would be higher number of Spanish language background students in Comandantes, fantastic at this point in the puzzle, and higher number of school choice students and maintaining 7 sections. So all of those things are trending in the directions that are both fiscally as well as educationally the way we want them to be. And that is a snapshot of our kindergarten enrollment as of last week.
Any questions? Peter.
So thank you for this at this time. This is good. So, you know, we often get a surge of enrollment at the end of the summer, unexpected enrollment. I take that back. I shouldn't say often a surge. Those are some qualitative words, but it wouldn't be unexpected to get a certain number of kids. So I'm looking at like the line that's the closest to needing a new section. So like Wildwood, how many students would we could we take on there before we had to hit a 3rd section?
Sure. So school committee class size policy would suggest that we've got room for in the neighborhood of 10 additional students between now and the start of school. We typically try to keep it closer to 20 than going up to 22 or 23. The kindergarten classrooms are 1,300 square feet. So physically, in terms of space, they're much larger. And they do have a paraeducator support. So, you know, when I was a principal at Crocker Farm, we had 23 students 1 year, and it was fabulous. And I think some of it depends on the composition of students as well. And so that's always hard to know when the kids are going into kindergarten, which is one of the challenge, and we do screening, which is one tool. But, you know, I think you're right to know that, but we also, we have students who register who end up not coming as well, right? So I'm not saying we're going to trend in a negative direction on enrollment numbers. We don't, but every year students enroll, and at some point in the summer, either families move or they may make a different option for schooling for their family. So, you know, it cuts a little bit both ways. So it is something we're keeping an eye on, but looking at past history, we would expect there to be, you know, in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 more students registering over the summer. If this was like, you know, late April, I'd feel differently, but, you know, July starts on Friday. So we can't know what the future will hold, but right now we feel like based on prior trends, we would be able to keep the 2 kindergarten classes at Wildwood. And every week we look at the data and assess it. So I think you're right to be asking the question. None of that's a critique of what you were saying, Peter.
Any other questions? Questions from other folks before going back to Peter? Peter?
So in terms of this being fiscally good news, so I mean, so to borrow your phrase, cuts both ways. I mean, yes, it's decreased staffing cost, but I mean, long-term view, we don't want to see declining enrollment, right? I mean, so where does this line up? I know this has impact to the next item we're talking about, but in terms of one of the larger pictures that we focus on, which is trying to attract students to our district, trying to level off the declining, potentially even bring back students to our district. Where does this meet in your expectations and coming into this year? And do you see this at all as continuing or going against recent trends and patterns?
This is about as expected. So when we look at our census data indicated this year, potentially would be a low enrollment year. We see that trending back up over the next couple, not wildly up, but the information is up. Our pre-enrollment in charter students that we received from the state did not show a super high number who were pre-enrolled in charter schools this spring. So I would say this is right now as expected, and I think for Wildwood and Crocker Farm, a thing to note that some of those students who would typically go there are going to Fort River because of the Comandantes program. So the numbers, at those 2 schools get artificially deflated because some of those students are going to a school outside their catchment area.
Any other questions? No? Then we lost screens. Okay, we'll go back to item D now, which is the FY23 budget. And for folks not aware, the town council met last week and voted approved the budget that the town manager had submitted and declined to our request for an additional $50,000 for our budget. So we are now faced with a decision on how to handle that. So I think I'm going to back over to Mike and Doug to sort of walk through your thoughts and proposal on that.
Thank you. So this is a tough one. It's been a tough one since we started the conversation for everyone involved. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you for your advocacy. And I think what continues to be challenging, and there's no blame or fault in this statement, is that 4 of our 6 bargaining units, their contracts end 2 days from now, and we don't exactly know what their salaries will be next year. So there's a lot of unknowns that we have. That being said, as I've said from the beginning, I see the value in having, at least in this transition year, if we can afford it, transition year because next year 6th grade's over in the middle school. If we could increase specialists to full-time, I'm highly supportive of that. I've been consistent saying that throughout. Based on this information on enrollment for kindergarten, some other enrollment, a couple grade levels where we think we may be able to, I think we are planning to not have to fill the same number of sections we had this year. Just, as kids get older and the grade levels, our ability to have classes of 21 feels a little different than when they're, really little or 22. And also that the physical spaces at Fort River and Wildwood are 2,000 square feet classrooms. So it allows for some class sizes to perhaps be a little larger, both in terms of COVID, but also from a teaching and learning sense. There's multiple teaching stations. We have special ed co-teachers who can be in there. And instead of the old Fort River and Wildwood where everyone was packed in, that's not the case at these schools. So, for me, the risk of moving the appropriated budget up by the $53,000 and change is that we still have lots of variables, lots of unknowns. We could have students, as Peter just noted, come in over the summer. but kind of where I'm sitting, and Doug and I have spoken at length about this over the last couple of weeks, not knowing what the town council would do, would be to use some funds that we have in the back of the budget. Every year we have a teacher and 2 paraeducators in the back of the budget. This year's no different than that in the control accounts, and use a portion of that to fund, to increase specialists. The risk is that things could get worse, right? The unknowns could come up, and it cuts our margins, and we could be in a place of having to freeze budgets when we get back in the fall. There's not that much discretionary spending that happens in the summer, so I'm not worried about anything happening over the next couple weeks or couple months. Teachers already have made their supply orders. That's all set. The discretionary spending really starts up when kids come back. So there's some risk involved, but some of the other financial trends are going in a direction that makes me and Doug feel more comfortable with taking on the risk. If we do come back in the fall and other trends are going in a different direction, we may have some difficult decisions to make. But my thinking has evolved as more data has come to me. And it's not that there's no risk. I want to be really clear about that. There's definitely a risk here, and we could be having some very difficult conversations in the fall. 2 of my 6 years in this role, we've started with larger deficits than this in this particular district, right? One because of health insurance, one because of another situation, and we managed it. It's not easy. We had to make very, very difficult decisions, but we've been able to do it. So, with enrollment data for kindergarten as well as some other grade levels, we had a number of students unexpectedly leave the district who required additional adults to access the curriculum. That was not known when this conversation was going on, and that's not because of this district. That's because people's families move, right? They get jobs elsewhere. They have family needs elsewhere. So, we have some enrollment trends, both in terms of numbers, but also in terms of the number of adults who may be needed to support student access to the curriculum, that makes me more comfortable with the risk. My vantage point hasn't changed on ESSER. I would like to avoid using ESSER for this purpose, but I feel more comfortable with the risk on the appropriated budget side with information that we didn't have when we first talked about it, enrollment. And again, the specifics of enrollment. Because of confidentiality, I'm not going to go into more detail about the specific students whose families are moving out, but just there's adults attached to certain students based on need, and we support all students to access the curriculum. And there's been some changes there unrelated to our programming that will affect our bottom line. So, Doug, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, or that captured where we're sitting.
No, I think that captures exactly where we sit at this point.
Yeah. So my recommendation to the committee is dipping into the control accounts and accessing the funds to increase those positions to be full-time for next year. I think long-term, we're going to have some real questions about how to fund these positions, and we knew that going in. I think Jennifer and others shared that in prior conversations. I agree with that, but I think where we're sitting at the moment, the year we're going to have with a major transition occurring, having sat in meetings last week about 6th grade to the middle school and thinking about what we need to do for 5th and 6th grade this year, and a new math curriculum being implemented, and the number of staff that we want to support for teachers to observe. Like, there's a million reasons why I think, not a million, that's late. That's me tired late at night in my 4th hour of meeting. But I think there are many reasons why this particular year is worth doing, even if we know that, or even if we believe that we may not be able to support this in years moving forward. I do think it makes sense for next year to take a risk. And, if we get it in the fall, other information may become available. But the information we have now, we feel like it's a risk worth taking.
Irv, raised your hand.
Yes, I did. Even at this late hour of the night, I raised my hand. Mike, control versus ESSER accounts. What would be the risk if you use ESSER money rather than control account money? And what is the risk by using control account money?
I can start with that. Doug can certainly jump in. We're already using in my opinion, a significant amount of ESSER funds. And those are one-time money that goes away, right? And so the more we use now, the less we have to support the budget in the next 2 fiscal years where it's possible to use ESSER. Control accounts are intended to, or part of the control account, as mentioned in a prior meeting, is for unexpected expenses, and that's often based on enrollment, either enrollment numbers where sections need to be added, or where students enter our district with needs that need to be met that weren't budgeted for. On both of those accounts, we're trending in a positive direction. So for me, this fits well within a control account expense. We have the funds, we budget for it every year for a control account. So for me, it's both something that if those trends continue is more likely to be replicable than one-time funds that go away. And I think when we look at how we were spending our ESSER funds, I would like to keep it as best we can more focused on impact of the pandemic. And, you know, I think one could certainly make the argument for that, but I don't think that's why we're having the conversation we're having tonight, is the pandemic for these needs. So I feel like it's a more authentic use of funds for the purpose.
So
Peter.
I move to modify the FY23 budget to decrease control accounts by $53,400 and to increase staff salaries by $53,400 to restore the specialist teachers to 100% FTE.
Second.
Can I, Chair, may I speak to my motion?
Is there any further discussion? Yes, you may.
So, I mean, in short, this is an increased risk, but given the brief summary by the superintendent, the finance director, I'm willing to take it. And so I'm obviously inclined to vote in favor of the motion I just proposed. But, you know, I have something to say that about the process of how this was arrived at, in particular, how the town of Amherst has conducted itself. And I want to preface this by saying that I have a great respect and appreciation for the level of support that the town of Amherst has shown for our public schools over the years, far above and beyond what's minimally required by law, as is reflective of community values, but nonetheless. And you know, I also have a lot of respect and appreciation for our town manager, our town finance director, our town council president, others on the town council who did not support this proposal. And so this is not a reflection on their, what I think of their valuation of the schools. This is a you know, a reasonable but strong disagreement with how they arrived at this conclusion. And you know, there's a few things that really bothered me about how the town went about its business. You know, the first was I feel like there was some definite misleading information that was misleading. I won't say intentionally misleading, but there was information stated by the Finance Committee in their discussions, stated in the Finance Committee's report, stated during the Town Council's discussion of this item, that was misleading, particularly about the position of the Superintendent and Finance Director. So it was characterized that this proposal by the school committee to go $53,400 above guidance was not in line with what the superintendent supported, and that's false. Yes, the superintendent's initial draft budget was that he proposed to this committee was in line with the town guidance, but that's because that's our protocol. That's what we direct him to do. And it's from that baseline that we have the discussion. It did not carry the weight of recommendation as was implied in the finance committee report and at the town council discussion. And it's unfortunate that if it did at all, swayed votes on this. Likewise, it was reported in the finance committee report that our finance director said, "Oh, you can just, you know, take this money from somewhere else in the account." Again, implying that there was some qualitative support for the town manager's budget that didn't include these additional funds on the part of the finance director. And again, that's not true. And I've verified this with the superintendent and finance director. You know, and the finance director, it was a conversation about, yes, technically you could transfer any amount of value to any other value. Yes, you could do that, but that's a judgment call. That's what we're here talking about. You know, the second point of the three that really bothered me is this whole discussion at the town level about fiscal constraint and the coming difficult years of operational fiscal constraint. You know, this school committee has cut a lot in recent fiscal years from our operational budget, including the reduction of this particular item that we're talking about tonight, the 100% FTE to the 80% FTE. on the specialist teachers that we cut last year when we cut over $300,000 in order to do what? To stay within the town's guidance like we always do. The Amherst School Committee has been the model fiscal partner to the town in terms of honoring and staying within guidance. And we did everything we possibly could in terms of process this fiscal year, from beginning right away saying, hey, we might not be able to stay within the guidance, to bring this up at the budget coordinating group meetings, to having individual conversations, to being available to talk about why we might not be able to stay within guidance. And at the end, we had a very involved discussion, and we used as much ESSER as the group felt we could come to a consensus on. And we said, okay, we're 53,400 above what the guidance is, and staff effort from our business office has secured more than 2/3 of that overage in terms of reimbursement for COVID sick time. And we didn't get any response from the town manager, from a direct response from the town manager, from the finance, from the town council. We just got an email one day saying, from the town manager saying that he didn't support our proposal. And I feel like the discussion has just completely ignored the history of this committee and the modesty of this increase that we've asked for. And it leaves me really wondering in the future of this guidance. When they say, is it a decree in which we can't go above it, or is it actual guidance? Because if it's actual guidance and you actually do want to engage with us in terms of a process, in terms of hearing from us what we feel the needs of the schools are, so that you can make a decision about the level of funding for schools, then let's do that. But if you're going to come back with an argument that says, well, that's the guidance and you can't go over it, then it's not guidance. And we shouldn't waste our time with budget coordinating group and other things like that. So, I'll just bookend this again, because I know this sounds emotional, because I am upset about a few aspects of this. But I'll just bookend it by saying I still have an immense amount of respect and appreciation for the support that our town manager and finance director and town council provides for our schools in many different aspects, items at the region and other capital projects that I'm not even mentioning here. But I really have had a problem with how the process for this has gone down. I'm glad that the risk is lower. We're still engaging with the risk here in our budget. I'm glad the risk is lower. So I'm happy to move forward with this tonight. But I really hope that this is a moment where we can improve the collaborative relationship between the Amherst School Committee and the Town Council.
Irv?
Peter, I really appreciate what you said, but I would like to, for us to understand that we're in a different environment here in relationship to the Town Council versus a town meeting. And one of the things that is instructive to me is, and I'll ask a question in relationship to it, is how many of the school committee members went to the finance committee and voiced their concerns? That's A. B, how many school committee members went to the town council when they had the town council meeting and voiced our concerns about the item with the 53? How many of us went there? How many of us called allies to go to those meetings to ask the same questions and to advocate for our position? If we answer those questions in the negative, then we have a problem. If we think that we can just sit back, do what we've done in the past, and get what we want, that is not going to work. And the proof has already happened. And I've seen it over and over again. And I count myself as one. I didn't go. But I've seen in the last few days, actually yesterday, when you have allies show up for you, that which the finance committee recommends going to the town council can be overcome if you have enough allies who go and advocate for you. It happened yesterday. So I guess what I'm saying to us is our posture cannot be one of passivity. Our posture cannot be one where we don't have outreach to our allies. Our posture cannot be one in which we do not engage our allies in our community, in our cause. We cannot no longer afford to do that.
I also going back actually to the comments about risk and but a risk worth taking. I want to, as we do this, I'm heartened that there is some sort of movement that you've described, Mike and Doug, that sort of gives you comfort. I don't know what the word. Confidence isn't the right word. I don't know what the word is, but sort of that this is a rational risk worth taking, as opposed to that, because I think through this whole process there was a narrative, um, in town council, some community members saying we have the money and we can just make it work. And so that was sort of and Peter, you referenced this too, that somehow there was money. And I want to just sort of state again, kind of repeat what you said, Mike, about the control accounts, and but take it a little further. I mean, that's not that's not the district sandbagging, and that's not the school committee sandbagging the budget so that we can make things work. And in order to fit an increase in spending, it does require a cut someplace else. And so I'm heartened because I am not interested in making any cuts in order to add to staff, no matter how much I want this add to happen, no matter how valuable I think that this can be. If we have to make cuts in other areas that are essential to our services, that's not what I'm interested in. And I just want, as we do this, I think we need to be vocal about that. This is not you didn't sandbag. You have a lot more information today on last week of June than we had back in March, April, when we were voting on this budget. That's a significant change. You've had kindergarten registration, that didn't happen. There's a lot more information that we know now that we did not know then. And those control accounts also are not a slush fund. You described it also as it's our insurance policy, because if a student comes into our doors in October, November, April, we can't say no to those students. We are obliged to fund their education. We are obliged to provide the services, whatever they be, that they need. And that's what that control account is there for. So it is a risk. I feel confident that by what you've described, that it's not an undue risk, that you've had riskier things. So I'm comfortable voting for this. But I just want the community to make sure that folks understand that this is not the school committee and the school district was sandbagging as we went into this. I also want to share sort of the sentiment of disappointment in the town council, and just to address your comments, or I was at the finance committee. I presented at the finance committee. I've spoken with multiple town councilors in the intervening time, including members on the finance committee and not on the finance committee. So I think one of the things that I heard repeatedly in those conversations was this sense of distrust, which I share Peter's frustration of where is this coming from, because for years, and certainly ever since most of us have been on the committee, we've made cuts to meet guidance. We've never once gone above guidance. But also some sort of, we didn't follow the process, which again gets back to is it a guidance or is it a decree? And so some of the conversations that I've had with town councilors, including the council president, is how can we make it so that the budget coordinating group is actually a coordinating group, or to Peter's point, that it really is a decree and it's not really guidance. This is what you have and there's no discussion beyond that. But if we are going to, the town charter does actually require a budget coordinating group. So how can we work together to actually make it a coordinating group and have these conversations. And at least one counselor talked about it during their discussion 2 weeks ago about what do we do if things change dramatically and one department, not just the schools, but needs a lifeline. And how does the town council how does the town council address that? So there's ways sort of outside of the budget process that can happen. But I think to the point of building budgets and building trust, I think that there's opportunity to evolve that process and that work that happens with the early on in the budget coordinating group. So I hope that we can continue those conversations over the summer and into the fall, so that we are being collaborative, we are being open, both directions as we develop next year's budget, or I should say the following year's budget, because we just talked about next year's budget. Irv.
Well, two things. Most of the council, and also the town manager, when they said that we could handle, the school committee had money to handle it, what they were referring to was that, hey, we want you to spend your ESSER funds on this. We in the town are spending ARPA funds, which are temporary money, for a number of things in staff position. If we can do that, why can't you do that? That was a subtext that was on the town council's mind, the town manager's mind. So that really needs to be understood. That's where they were. And the second thing I just referred to, it's not that you went, Allison, to the finance committee or to the town council, or that you, Allison, talked to town councilors, etc. But how many of our allies talked to them? How many of them showed up at meetings? Yesterday, the finance committee had recommended to the town council, or the committee that I sat on, that they give this committee 50% what we were asking for. But the work of us on that committee and our allies went to town council and got that reversed. And all I'm saying is that is an example of what I'm trying to say. We cannot say, hey, it's just us on this committee going and advocating. It has to be our allies. If we don't get that down and get it right, we will always be back in this position.
Jennifer.
I call the question, if that's allowed.
Thank you. Do we have to take a vote on that before we take the vote on the motion? Yes, okay. Peter, you're going to explain about how it works?
So call the question isn't really a thing, but in Robert's rules, I think it's called something different, but I think we all understand the gist of what the motion is. So, and it's Robert's rules of order as interpreted by the chair. So as long as you understand what it is, then we're good.
Yeah. But we have to vote on that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I will take a roll call vote to call the question. Peter?
Peter, nay.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, I.
I'm sorry, you said Ben?
Ben, yeah.
Yeah, Ben, I.
Irv?
Irv, I.
And Allison, I. Okay. So now that passes, and we will now proceed with the vote on the motion on the table. Actually, no, I probably can't ask this question now. I just had a question on the motion, the original motion, whether it needed to be amended. Can I move to amend it, Peter?
Well, so I mean, ultimately it's up to you. You're the arbiter of parliamentary procedure. If you know, you accept the meaning of the motion as having done what it meant to do, then that's all you need. So no, you don't need to.
So my question was, because I believe the motion is to decrease control accounts by some, and then increase the staff accounts, but the staff accounts is already increased. So I believe that the motion should be just to decrease the control accounts. Because our budget, the budget that we approved is 50,000 more than what is being appropriated. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, parliamentary, you're in a bit of a sticky wicket now because technically we just voted to end discussion. And so we have a motion that has been presented. And so we ought to immediately go forward on it, but you're the chair, so you can do what you want.
It's too late. If it does, I'm going to look at Doug. Does it matter that level of detail? If not, then I'm going to just proceed.
I think you can correct the technicality, which is, I think the intention was, as you stated, so I think it's a technicality. I think you can probably vote on just adjusting the control accounts of budget to match guidance with what's been appropriated by the council.
Okay. Peter?
So to make it as clean as possible, as long as it's all right with everybody on the committee, I can take that as a friendly amendment and then we could just vote it clean. All right.
Okay. Sorry. So on that friendly amended motion, we'll take a roll call vote. Irv?
Aye.
Allison, aye. Ben?
And I.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, I.
Thank you. The amended motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And now we're nearing the end, guys. So sorry. We'll just keep playing forward. Future agenda planning. This is mostly to talk about our calendar for next year, which is a proposal is attached. So continuing with our practice of meeting once per month, proposing that we start on the 30th of August, which is the equivalent in 2022 of when we started in 2021. And then continue on a monthly basis from there. The exception was in January because of that break, just to sort of not get it too far off kilter. So our next meeting would be August 30th, and then the next subsequent meeting would be September 27th. Those are all Tuesdays, by the way. And then at that first meeting, we will continue our conversation on goals guidance and goals for FY23. We'll get that more full update on Caminantes enrollment. And this other one was, I think, when a member asked for an update on the support that that our schools are providing for the LGBTQ+ community in our elementary schools. This is not by no means carved in stone. So as we get closer to August 30th, folks email me, let's say the week before, so by the 23rd, if there's other items that you would like to see potentially on the 30th, and depending on where we are, we'll fit those in. Any questions? Calendar look good? Okay. With that, I apologize, but given that the learning that we had in another committee, if it's okay with folks, I did attach all of the warrants. So warrant reports that I'm going to read. And I'm not going, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to read all of the source of funding, but everybody can read along and see those. So I will now proceed with that report. I don't know if these are in the same order as on there. So I, Alison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $115,396.70 for a warrant dated June 3rd, 2022. And I signed that on June 3rd, 2022. I authorized by my signature a transfer request in the amount of $1,367 for a transfer dated June 6th, 2022. And I signed, that was for Crocker Farm, and I signed that on June 7th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $33,011.18 for a warrant dated June 13th, 2022. And I signed that on June 9th, 2022. I authorized by my signature a transfer request in the amount of $1,891.09 for a transfer dated June 8th, 2022, and I signed that on June 14th, 2022. I authorized payroll in the amount of $748,279.37 dated June 15th, 2022, and I signed that also on June 15th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $691,876.91 dated June 29th, 2022, and I signed that today, June 27th, or yesterday, June 27th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll. Did I just read this one? $348,505.67 dated June 29th, and I signed that on June 27th, 2022. I authorized by my signature payroll in the amount of negative $365.43 dated March 23rd, 2022, and I signed that on June 27th, 2022. And I believe, spread that one. Oh, these are all the same. Oh, sorry. I signed authorized payroll in the amount of negative $365.43 dated April 6th, 2022. And I signed that on June 27th, 2022. And I believe I have one more. Yes. I authorized payroll in the amount of negative $365.43 dated March 23rd, 2022, and I signed that on June 27th, 2022. And that is all of the warrants. And next up is gifts. Unless somebody else wants to make a motion, I will move that we accept the following gifts from Marta Olver, number 996302 and 996323 to support Crocker Farm at the principal's discretion in the amount of $20. From Michael M. Wick, MD, to support the Wildwood Susan Begyard Memorial Camp Scholarship in the amount of $300. And from Robert and Joan MacDonald, number 5831, to support Wildwood Susan Begyard Memorial Camp Scholarship in the amount of $300 for a total gift of amount of $620. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Peter, and we'll take a roll call vote. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Allison, aye. Ben?
And I.
Irv?
Irv, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, I.
Great. The motion passes unanimously. And last up, I move that we adjourn. Oh, Mike?
I just want to thank Amherst Media. They've been great partners. They're in the spirit, they're moving to a temporary space right now. They've managed all the committees, and this is our last committee meeting for the year. I don't want to extend. I know we've been here a while, but we did a number of appreciations before, and I just want to publicly thank Alexis and her team over at Amherst Media for doing such a fabulous knockout job all year long. So I know they're in the spirit. Moving's not fun, and most people don't have equipment that is complex like Amherst Media. So I can imagine that's not a fun process they're going through right now. So Alexis and everybody at Amherst Media, thank you for the end of this school committee year.
Where are they moving?
It was in the paper. So I'm going to.
Thank you.
I'll send you the link, Irv.
It was in the paper. That's a great answer.
I'm going to move that we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and we'll take a roll call vote. Peter,
Peter, I.
Ben,
And I.
Jennifer,
Jennifer, I.
and Allison, I. And did we lose Irv? Looks like it. Okay, then we are adjourned.